Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is, well, it's intensely personal and surprisingly hopeful, actually. We're going deep into this whole concept of metabolic inheritance. We're unpacking an idea that's, frankly, revolutionary.
Yeah.
The idea that your health, your energy, even your chronic symptoms, they might not be about bad luck or, faulty genes.
Right, which is what we're always told.
Exactly. Instead, they're a kind of generational legacy, a pattern of metabolic programming and stress exposure passed right down your family line.
It's a huge shift in thinking, and this deep dive, it's really about exploring that bioenergetic framework that's gotten so much traction lately. Thanks to the work of people like Dr. Ray Peat and what we've been talking about on the Metabolic Revolution show.
Right.
We're trying to move the conversation completely away from this idea of, fatalistic genetics.
Oh, it's in my genes. I can't do anything.
Precisely. And we're putting the focus squarely on cellular energy production because when we see families, mothers, daughters, even grandmothers, all suffering from similar issues.
But with totally different labels.
Totally different labels. One has anxiety, one has infertility, another has chronic fatigue. The common denominator is almost always physical. It's low body temperature.
Coldness.
The coldness, which is just the physical sign of suppressed cellular energy and, a compromised thyroid.
Okay, we have to unpack this because that foundational claim is pretty shocking. We're really talking about this concept you've called unwitting metabolic betrayal. The idea that parents who are trying so hard to follow modern health advice, low fat, calorie counting, tons of exercise, even fasting.
All the right things.
Right. They might be, without knowing it, programming their own children for a lifetime of metabolic struggle. They think they're being healthy, but the signal their cells are getting is one of, extreme danger.
It is a harsh term, I know, but it really describes what we see in practice every single day. People are so diligent, they're sticking to the guidelines they're told are healthy, especially during really vulnerable times like trying to conceive or during pregnancy.
Of course. That's when you want to do everything perfectly.
Exactly. But these guidelines, which almost always involve some kind of chronic deficit or restricting a whole macro group, they send a metabolic signal that is identical to wartime scarcity.
Wow.
Or actual famine. I mean, the body can't tell the difference, so the mother's body just interprets this as a major threat, and it programs the developing fetus for, aggressive energy conservation. That suppressed state, that is the inheritance.
And that framework brings us right to the real-world evidence. The data you've collected is it illustrates this so perfectly. Let's start with that case study of Jennifer and Emma.
Yeah.
Because it shows 3 generations all suffering from the same core issues, but getting completely different diagnoses from their doctors.
This case, it's a perfect example of why we need a paradigm shift. We have to stop looking at individual symptoms and start looking at the underlying machine.
Okay, so tell us about Jennifer, the mother.
So Jennifer's 47. She came in with all the classic perimenopause struggles, chronic hot flashes, terrible insomnia, weight gain that just it seemed to defy physics. She was barely eating anything. Plus anxiety attacks, constant brain fog. But the key thing, the most important piece of data, when we had her measure her temperature, it was consistently 97.1 degrees Fahrenheit.
So a cold engine. A really clear signal of a suppressed metabolism.
Exactly. A cold, suppressed engine.
And then you look at her daughter, Emma, who's only 23. And this is where that generational pattern just becomes undeniable. Emma's been diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. She hadn't had a period in 14 months.
Amenorrhea,
And gained 30 pounds in a year.
Yeah.
But here's a key part of her story. Emma was a total fitness fanatic. She was doing everything the modern wellness world tells you to do.
Everything. Restrictive keto, intermittent fasting.
CrossFit 5 days a week.
And 47.2 degrees Fahrenheit.
Almost identical to her mom's.
Exactly. And then the final piece of the puzzle, the one that ties it all together, Jennifer is telling her own mother, the grandmother, about this joint struggle they're having.
Right.
And the grandmother just quietly says that she went through the exact same physical and emotional turmoil in her 40s. But back then, her doctors just dismissed it all.
You're just getting old.
You're just getting old. It's stress. It's hormones. So you have 3 women, 3 generations, same core symptoms, same cold body temperature, but all with different official labels.
So we have to stop here for a second. What does this actually mean for someone listening right now who's been told for years that their anxiety or their weight struggles are all just genetic? The core insight here is that they weren't doomed by some faulty gene they all shared, were they?
That is the essential takeaway. This is not genetic destiny. Their DNA sequence is probably pristine. But their cells, their mitochondria, the little engines in their cells, they had been taught how to conserve energy.
Taught. So it's a learned response.
It's a learned response passed down over generations. Think of your mitochondria like thermostats. In this family, the thermostats had all been turned down to 97 degrees as a protective measure.
Right.
These patterns get inherited through stress, through the nutritional environment, even family attitudes about food. Jennifer's cells learned that conservation mode from her mother's environment, probably starting in the womb, and then Jennifer, completely unknowingly, passed that same operating manual on to Emma.
And the most tangible, shocking piece of data that backs this up is the temperature connection itself. You've tracked hundreds of mother-daughter pairs, and the precision of this shared suppression is it's wild.
It really is the smoking gun. It's what links all these seemingly separate symptoms across generations. We've analyzed data from over 300 mother-daughter pairs, and in a staggering 89% of those cases,
89%.
the mothers and daughters share a morning body temperature that's within 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit of each other. Just think about that. That level of consistency. It signals a shared, basically identical basal metabolic rate, the same level of thyroid performance at the cellular level.
Within 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit. That is surgically precise. So if the mother is consistently running cold in that low 97-degree range, the daughter is almost guaranteed to be running cold too.
We're almost guaranteed.
But let's get into the technicals for a moment. If their internal thermostats are so clearly suppressed, how often are these women getting a normal diagnosis from their doctors when they get lab work done?
Almost constantly. And this is the great deception of modern medicine when it comes to metabolism. Their TSH, their thyroid-stimulating hormone, that marker often sits right inside the normal lab range.
So on paper, they look fine.
On paper, they look fine. Now, usually it's hugging the upper end of that range, which is actually the low end of performance, but it's still technically in the range. And the standard TSH test, it's just measuring a feedback loop from the brain to the thyroid.
Okay.
It doesn't measure cellular performance. It doesn't measure energy output. But body temperature, that is a direct measurement of what's happening in the cell. It's the effect of thyroid hormone. So TSH can look normal while the body is functionally hypothyroid at the cellular level, which is what that 97-degree temperature shows us. The cell has learned to be cold to survive.
And it's not just the number on the thermometer. It's the whole pattern, isn't it? The timing of energy crashes, the weight struggles. It's the same playbook.
Precisely. We see the daughter gets that 3 p.m. energy crash at the exact same time her mother does. They both struggle to lose weight even when they're barely eating because their bodies are just programmed for aggressive energy conservation.
So they become super efficient at storing every calorie.
Incredibly efficient. Even if the total number of calories is low, it's a beautifully consistent inherited strategy for survival. But, it leads to deep chronic frustration in a world where food is actually abundant.
That sets us up perfectly to pivot from the problem to the solution. Because the Chen family story, it proves that this deeply embedded 3-generation cycle is absolutely reversible. Tell us about what happened with grandmother Lin, mother Wei, and daughter Mei.
The Chen family was one of the most powerful clinical examples we've ever seen of a synchronous intergenerational healing. They all came in with severely low temperatures, all shared between 96.4 and 96.8 degrees.
Wow, that is cold.
Very cold. Grandmother Lin, she was 72, had severe osteoporosis, was on 6 different medications. Mother Wei, 45, was pre-diabetic and deep in perimenopause. And the daughter, Mei, just 23, had severe PCOS and hadn't had a period in over a year. Their core issue was low energy. It just manifested differently in each generation.
So facing that kind of entrenched suppression, what was the protocol? What did you do to signal metabolic safety and reverse decades of this pattern?
Well, the key was that they approached it as a collective family healing project.
I love that.
The protocol itself was simple, but, radically different from what they'd been told. We focused on adequate calories, non-restrictive eating, plenty of metabolically supportive carbs, so fruits, properly prepared grains, potatoes.
The scary foods.
The scary foods.
Right.
And regular eating to prevent blood sugar from dipping, and moderate supportive activity instead of that exhaustive metabolically taxing exercise. The key wasn't just the food, it was the signal. The signal was abundance and consistency.
And within 6 months, the change wasn't just in how they felt, it was measurable on their thermometers.
It was absolutely transformative. All three of them saw their morning temperatures stabilize above 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's a huge jump.
A huge jump. It meant their cellular engines had been fully restored, and that one change led to this cascade of healing. Lynn, the grandmother, was able to reduce her medications from 6 down to 2 as her bone density improved. Wee's fasting glucose completely normalized. She was no longer pre-diabetic. And May, the daughter, who had been struggling with infertility, she got her period back by month 4 and then conceived naturally 2 months later.
That's incredible.
They didn't just reverse their own symptoms, they broke the metabolic cycle for the entire family line.
That is the most potent evidence that this isn't genetics, it's programming. And that success story is the perfect bridge to the historical evidence that really supports this whole bioenergetic view. We have to go back to the work of Dr. Weston A. Price in the 1930s.
Price's research it's foundational, absolutely foundational to understanding generational health. He was a dentist who basically became a nutritional anthropologist. He traveled all over the globe to these really isolated traditional populations to study the link between their diet and their physical structure before they were introduced to Western food. And he was meticulous. He took notes, photos, x-rays of everyone.
And what he found in these groups, the ones eating their native, whole, traditional diets, it was a level of metabolic robustness that we just don't see anymore.
We don't at all. They had perfect dental arches, no crowded teeth, virtually zero cavities. They were robustly fertile, had these wide faces that indicated really strong bone structure, just overall health that spanned generations.
And they intuitively understood this stuff.
They did. They understood metabolic inheritance by just prioritizing nutrient density. Their physical structure was a reflection of perfect metabolic capacity, the ability to build tissues correctly.
But then came the alarming part, the part where he studied their direct descendants, the kids and grandkids, who adopted what he called the displacing foods of modern commerce. Tell us about that decline.
The decline was shockingly fast. I mean, it often happened within just one generation. The children who were born to parents who had started eating white flour, refined sugar, canned goods, processed vegetable oils, they saw rapid physical degeneration.
In one generation.
1. Their dental arches narrowed, which led to crowded teeth, the need for extractions, which is a clear sign of suppressed bone development. They had rampant cavities, the sudden onset of chronic disease, and sharply reduced fertility.
That's the critical insight, isn't it? Their DNA was the same, but the expression of that DNA, the blueprints for building a strong, healthy body, was crippled almost instantly by just a lack of nutrients in these new metabolic disruptors.
It proves that the environmental signal, delivered through nutrition, just overrides genetic resilience with astonishing speed. The metabolism, which controls all the raw energy and resources you need for construction, it just couldn't function optimally on that processed, low-density fuel. And that failure to thrive was then passed on to the next generation as compromised physical structure.
And this rapid decline explains why these traditional cultures put so much value on preconception nutrition. Not just what the mother ate during pregnancy, they were playing the long game.
They had this intuitive wisdom that our modern society has completely lost. They just knew you couldn't build a robust child from a depleted mother. The Maasai in Africa, for example, they'd give women planning a pregnancy access to the absolute highest quality, most nutrient-dense foods, the best meat, the best milk, for months beforehand.
Right.
The Swiss villagers, they had a ritual of feeding couples something called June butter. They recognized that the butter made in peak summer, when the cows were eating rapidly growing fresh grass, was exponentially higher in fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, and K2.
So the high cholesterol, saturated fat powerhouses, and the Pacific Islanders focused on specific seafood and fish eggs. It seems like all traditional wisdom just screams abundance, nutrient density, and animal fats.
Exactly, which just highlights the profound irony of modern prenatal advice. Traditional wisdom demanded metabolic abundance before you even thought about conceiving, to build a resource-rich environment. Modern advice, on the other hand, often restricts calories, tells you to avoid saturated fat, limits animal products, and promotes this deep fear of gaining weight.
Right.
It effectively enforces metabolic stress during the one period when ancestral wisdom demanded metabolic security.
To really understand the catastrophe of enforcing that kind of metabolic stress, we have to look at the Dutch hunger winter of 1944-45. I mean, this historical event gives us the most powerful human data on metabolic programming, on epigenetics, through scarcity.
The famine was devastating. Rations dropped as low as 400 to 800 calories a day for months. Researchers followed the cohort of children who were born to mothers pregnant during that time, and the results. They're an undeniable map of deep metabolic programming.
And the kids whose mothers were starving during early gestation, when all the organs and metabolic blueprints are being laid down, they had lifelong metabolic handicaps.
Their bodies had been programmed in the womb to expect a world of permanent threat and scarcity. So the body's survival mechanism just kicked in. It set their metabolism to an aggressive conservation mode.
So highly efficient fat storage.
Exactly. Reduced basal metabolic rate, suppressed cellular energy, and a nervous system that was hyper-tuned for threat detection. It was an adaptation for survival in a famine, but it became highly maladaptive when they were born into the calorie-rich world of post-war Europe.
They were just programmed to store, and never burn.
Never burn.
And here's the generational shocker, the part that brings us right back to our topic. The effects were measurable 2 generations later. The grandchildren of those famine victims showed increased rates of obesity and disease.
That finding fundamentally validates the idea of metabolic inheritance. It showed that severe metabolic stress, that famine signal, it created a lasting epigenetic handicap that didn't just go away when the first generation started eating normally. It persisted. The grandchild's body inherited a suppressed operating manual designed for scarcity decades after the famine was over.
Okay, this is a crucial moment for anyone listening. They might hear the Dutch famine story and think, that's tragic, but it doesn't apply to my 1,800-calorie macro-counting diet. But you're arguing the biological signal is identical.
Metabolically, the body doesn't distinguish between forced starvation and voluntary restriction. The signal is exactly the same because the mechanism is the same. Restricting to 1,200 or 1,500 calories a day on a diet like keto or with intermittent fasting, especially if it leads to those consistent blood sugar dips, it is metabolically identical to a state of wartime scarcity.
Let's look closer at that mechanism. Why is it identical?
When your blood sugar dips dramatically, which happens all the time with chronic dieting or fasting, the body has only one immediate way to keep the fetus alive. It activates the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
The stress response system.
It's the stress response system. It dumps massive amounts of stress hormones, mostly cortisol and adrenaline, into the mother's bloodstream. Cortisol's job is to break down stored protein and turn it into glucose to feed the brain. So bathing the fetus in high levels of cortisol programs that child for stress physiology, for a survival state.
Because the mother's body is signaling we are in an emergency.
Resources are unstable. And that constant repeated metabolic stress, that becomes the inheritance.
That perfectly explains the cycle. A mother restricts to be healthy. The restriction sends the scarcity signal, which programs the child's cells for conservation. And then the daughter ends up cold, tired, and struggling with her weight or fertility despite eating very little.
And that suppressed state just becomes the new generational baseline.
This mechanism of degradation is so powerful, and it brings us to that famous animal study that visually mapped this out over generations, Dr. Francis Pottinger's cats.
Pottinger's work from the 30s and 40s is required viewing for anyone trying to understand this. He studied hundreds of cats over 10 years, multiple generations. He compared a group fed an optimal raw meat and raw milk diet to a group fed cooked meat and pasteurized milk. So nutritionally identical, but degraded by heat.
And the raw food group, they just stayed perfectly healthy, robust, fertile, generation after generation, no disease, no deformities, a perfect model of metabolic health.
But the cooked food group showed this progressive, dramatic degeneration. The first generation had some minor issues like allergies and irritability. But by the second generation, the problems were way more severe. Widespread skeletal deformities, narrow jaws, dental crowding, chronic illness.
Yeah.
By the third generation, many of the cats were completely sterile, riddled with disease, highly aggressive. They couldn't produce viable offspring. The lineage just died out.
It shows how quickly poor nutrient quality, even when calorie intake is the same, can just lead to systemic intergenerational metabolic collapse. The body just runs out of the raw materials it needs to build and repair itself.
And this is where we find both the stark warning and the hope. Pottinger analyzed the recovery time. He found that you can damage metabolic health so badly that it goes extinct in just 3 generations. But for the sickest cats, the ones on the verge of sterility, it took about 4 generations of being back on the optimal raw diet for them to fully restore their health and fertility.
It takes so much longer to climb out of the hole than it does to dig it. And that timeline, It maps distressingly well onto the human population trend since the 1970s.
The 70s and 80s were the inflection point. That's when low-fat rules, the push for highly processed seed oils, and the fear of cholesterol became standard medical dogma. That generation of parents, the boomers, Gen X, was the first to really follow these metabolically disruptive guidelines. And each subsequent generation born after that has been progressively worse off metabolically.
So the parents of Gen Z were taught to fear fat and meat, and now Gen Z is developing metabolic diseases, diabetes, hypertension, fatty liver, in their teens and early 20s.
Right. Conditions that previous generations wouldn't see until their 50s or 60s.
It's not some mysterious genetic event.
No, it's the cumulative, progressive metabolic degradation from decades of worsening nutritional advice. And that low-energy, suppressed state is being passed down and intensified across the family line.
And the cost of that suppression. It's not just in physical illness, but in neurological and cognitive potential. Which brings us to the profound research of Dr. KATHARINA DALTON on progesterone and fetal brain development. Her findings on IQ differences are just staggering.
Dalton's research showed a direct causal link between the mother's hormone status and the child's cognitive potential. She found that women who maintained adequate progesterone levels throughout pregnancy, which is a powerful sign of good thyroid function and robust metabolic health,
Right.
their children had an average IQ of 130.
An average of 130, that's genius level.
Very high. And then the comparison. Women who were deficient in progesterone had children with an average IQ of 95.
Wait, a 35-point difference.
Yeah.
Just based on the mother's hormonal environment.
A 35-point difference, independent of their genetic background. It's the single most compelling piece of evidence that the maternal metabolism dictates the fetal environment, and that environment dictates the child's potential.
So why does this happen?
Well, progesterone is critical for neurological development, specifically for building the myelin sheaths that insulate nerve fibers and allow for rapid, efficient communication in the brain.
Okay, so why would a mother who is otherwise healthy, maybe just running a bit cold at 97 degrees, struggle to make enough progesterone? What's the technical link between temperature and hormones?
This is where bioenergetics gives us the ultimate explanation. Progesterone is a steroid hormone. It's made from cholesterol. The very first and most crucial step in making it is a process called cholesterol side chain cleavage. This converts cholesterol into pregnenolone, which then becomes progesterone. And this whole process is incredibly energy intensive. It requires a massive amount of cellular energy of ATP.
And ATP is made in the mitochondria, and making it generates heat, which is why body temperature is the direct marker of metabolic function.
Exactly. So if the mother is cold, running at 97 degrees, it means her cellular machinery is suppressed. She's not making a lot of ATP. Her body is in survival mode. The body cannot afford to prioritize the high energy demands of making tons of progesterone. It has to prioritize survival functions like keeping the heart beating. So a cold, suppressed, low-energy mother simply cannot produce the high levels of progesterone needed for optimal neurological development. And the child's cognitive potential is compromised. That suboptimal state registers as a cold temperature even if her labs look normal.
The implication of that is just massive. I mean, how much collective human potential has been dampened just because mothers were following well-meaning but metabolically destructive advice that suppressed their ability to generate heat and hormones. It sets the stage for what we have to call the modern prenatal disaster.
It forces us to confront the fact that most standard prenatal advice runs entirely counter to metabolic optimization and generational health.
Okay, let's detail the 6 most common ways modern advice suppresses maternal metabolism, creating this inherited coldness and scarcity signal. Let's analyze the harm for each one.
The first, and I would argue the most destructive, is the obsession with calorie restriction and the pervasive fear of weight gain.
Women are terrified of gaining more than that arbitrary 25 to 35 pound guideline, so they restrict, especially later in pregnancy.
It's metabolic sabotage at the worst possible time. Pregnancy increases metabolic demand by 20 to 30%. Restricting calories forces the mother into a deficit when demand is at its absolute highest. Gaining weight isn't about vanity, it's necessary biological infrastructure.
Right.
It accounts for a 50% increase in blood volume, the placenta, amniotic fluid, breast tissue, and essential fat stores for the huge energy demands of breastfeeding. If you restrict weight gain, you're restricting the resources needed to build a healthy baby and maintain your own health.
The second suppressive factor is that stubborn, outdated insistence on low-fat recommendations.
This is a direct attack on hormone synthesis. Women are still told to choose skim milk, low-fat yogurt, lean meats, to to avoid butter, cream, coconut oil, egg yolks. But like we just said, cholesterol from these healthy saturated fats is the mandatory raw material for progesterone.
Take away the building blocks.
And you can't build the house. You're guaranteeing hormonal deficiency.
Third, and this is a huge modern trend, carbohydrate restriction. Keto or low carb during pregnancy.
This is so risky. While the mother can use fat for fuel, glucose is the primary preferred fuel for the rapidly developing fetal brain. When a mother restricts carbs, she forces her body to maintain blood sugar for the fetus by triggering the stress response.
Cortisol and adrenaline again.
Exactly. The body initiates gluconeogenesis, making glucose from protein. This whole process just bathes the fetus in stress hormones. It is literally programming the child's nervous system for stress physiology before they're even born.
Fourth, the increasing pressure for excessive high-intensity exercise routines throughout pregnancy.
Exercise is a powerful metabolic stressor. Pregnancy already demands a huge metabolic increase. Adding heavy lifting, HIIT, or long-distance running on top of that creates competition for energy.
Body has to choose.
It has to choose. And it's going to divert precious resources away from fetal development and towards muscle recovery and repair. It prioritizes the mother's current fitness over the baby's metabolic security.
Fifth, the really problematic practice of intermittent fasting during pregnancy, which is still somehow promoted as a way to stabilize blood sugar.
Which is profoundly dangerous because the opposite is true. Every time the mother fasts, her blood sugar drops. To protect the fetus, the body releases a spike of cortisol to bring glucose levels back up. That repeated chronic spiking of cortisol just exposes the fetus to stress hormones over and over again, training the baby's nervous system for an emergency.
And finally, the baffling but common recommendation to restrict salt.
This one is just a fundamental misunderstanding of pregnancy physiology. Blood volume increases by an astonishing 50% during pregnancy.
50%.
50% to support the fetus and the placenta. That massive fluid increase requires sodium and water. Restricting salt impairs blood pressure regulation. It can compromise placental perfusion, the blood flow to the baby, and it just adds another layer of dangerous metabolic stress. All 6 of these standard recommendations suppress maternal metabolism by signaling scarcity, not abundance.
And the result of following this prenatal disaster advice is that universal complaint we hear from mothers all the time.
I feel
like I never truly recovered after I had my baby.
Precisely. They think the lingering fatigue, the weight they can't lose, the anxiety, the hormonal chaos, they think it's just the permanent price of motherhood. But in reality, they unknowingly crash their metabolism, sending months of scarcity signals during the 9 months when their energy demands were the highest. And tragically, they pass that suppression on to their child, setting up the next generation for the exact same struggles.
This feeds directly into the work popularized by Dr. Ray Peat on the maternal stress imprint. How psychological or metabolic stress actually programs the baby's temperament and stress response.
Pete explained that when the mother's cortisol and adrenaline levels are consistently elevated, whether it's from psychological stress like anxiety or, critically, metabolic stress from low blood sugar and restriction, those stress hormones readily cross the placental barrier.
So the fetus, just bathed in these powerful stress chemicals, is programmed to expect a world of constant threat and instability.
And that programming manifests as a highly conservative metabolism, so very efficient fat storage, and a hyperactive stress response system that's easily triggered later in life. This often shows up as chronic anxiety, difficulty regulating emotions, a baseline state of just being on edge.
So the child is effectively born with an anxiety disorder that's rooted in metabolic scarcity.
That's a great way to put it.
And this is how that vicious self-perpetuating cycle operates.
Yeah.
The child who is programmed for low energy and high stress grows up, becomes an exhausted, cortisol-fueled, stressed-out parent, and then unknowingly passes an intensified version of that suppression and hyperstress response to their own child.
And breaking that cycle, it requires not just looking at nutrition, but actively managing the stress signal itself. It means shifting the entire family's metabolic environment from a state of emergency to a state of absolute safety and abundance.
So let's wrap up this deep dive by guiding everyone listening through some concrete, actionable steps to reverse these patterns. If you're realizing you might have passed this on to your kids or you're planning a pregnancy, what's the action plan?
Step 1 is absolutely essential. Release the guilt. Just acknowledge that you are following what you sincerely believed was expert advice. The system failed you. Understanding the mechanism is the first step toward resolution, not blaming yourself.
Right. Step 2. Recognize that it's never too late to improve. Even if your kids are grown, optimizing your own metabolism now, getting your temperature up above 98 degrees, it models metabolic health for them. Children, especially daughters, they internalize these new healthy patterns. They learn to see food as fuel and support, not the enemy.
Step 3, and this is critical for anyone thinking about having kids. Prioritize preconception optimization with measurable markers. Aim for a body temperature consistently above 98 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 3 to 6 months before you even try to conceive.
Right.
That's the physiological sign that tells you your cellular engines are running hot enough to support robust progesterone production and a thyroid that's ready for the demands ahead.
Step 4 is redefining eating during pregnancy. This is the radical opposite of restriction. You have to eat abundantly.
Yes. The goal should be, 2,500 to 3,000 calories minimum, maybe more. Focus on those supportive carbs, fruit, potatoes, rice, adequate protein, and healthy saturated fats from butter, cream, coconut oil, quality animal products. That's where you get the cholesterol for your hormones. And use salt to taste. You have to throw out the fear of weight gain and just trust your body's wisdom.
Step 5, active, conscious stress management. You can't eliminate stress, but you can buffer your body from interpreting it as a metabolic emergency.
And buffer means providing resources. This means consistent, regular eating throughout the day to keep your blood sugar absolutely stable, prioritizing sleep, gentle, supportive movement that doesn't exhaust you, and connection. If your body has stable resources, it handles stress better without constantly dumping cortisol on your fetus.
And the final, crucial step, model metabolic health for the next generation. We have to consciously break the cycle of diet culture, food fear, and chronic restriction that has plagued women for decades.
The inheritance you pass forward should be one of warmth, abundance, and resilience, not coldness and scarcity. And this is a choice you can make today to end that generational pattern.
This deep dive has taken us on a remarkable journey. We've connected the lessons from traditional wisdom from Weston A. Price, analyzed the tragic data from the Dutch hunger winter, understood the speed of decline from Pottinger's cats, and confirmed that profound link between cellular energy and potential from KATHARINA Dalton's research.
And our own clinical data, tracking hundreds of mother-daughter pairs just proves that healing is absolutely possible across generations when we focus on restoring that cellular energy. Metabolic health is a truly powerful legacy. You may not have created the patterns that were passed down to you, but you are the generation that has the understanding and the resources to end them.
The goal is to consciously shift the family inheritance from one of restriction and coldness, where everyone is running at a low-functioning 97 degrees, to one of metabolic abundance and warmth, where the whole family is thriving and operating above 98 degrees.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. If metabolic suppression is a survival mechanism programmed in the womb to signal scarcity, what specific concrete action in terms of calories or fats or rest can you take today to signal metabolic safety and abundance to your body? That's how you change your current programming, and that is where the cycle of scarcity ends.